joined by one of America's leading experts on nutrition, someone who's been a big influence on people looking to lead healthy lives, including me. Dr. Michael Greger is a licensed medical doctor in general practice specializing in clinical nutrition and a founding member and fellow at the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. He's also the director of public health and animal agriculture at the Humane Society of the United States and the founder of the website nutritionfacts.org. Dr. Greger is also the author of a number of best-selling books, including his latest, How Not to Die, Discover the Foods Scientifically Proven to Prevent and Reverse Disease. Dr. Michael Greger, it's a pleasure to have you back with us.
So glad to be
for joining us. So this being Conversations of the Great Minds, I'd like to start out with you. What got you into medicine? What was the moment in your life when you thought, this is what I want to do?
You know, it was really all my grandmother. You know, I was just a kid when the doctor sent my grandma home in a wheelchair to die. She was diagnosed with end-stage heart disease. She already had so many bypass surgeries. She basically run out of plumbing at some point. She's so scarred up inside. Crushing chest pain, confined in a wheelchair. Her life was over age 65. Nothing more modern medicine could offer. And then she heard about this guy, Nathan Pritikin, this early lifestyle medicine pioneer on 60 Minutes, actually.
I've been
at the Pritikin Center.
Yeah, a friend of mine took his dad there. And very similar story. Finish the story.
Yeah. So this is back in the 70s. And she was one of his early patients, early success stories. She's actually featured in Pritikin's biography. It talks about Frances Greger, that's my grandma, who showed up, they wheeled her in, and she walked out. A few weeks later, she was walking 10 miles a day, went on to live another 31 years on this planet till age 96 to enjoy her 6 grandkids, including me, inspiring one of those grandkids to not only go to med school, but giving her enough healthy years to see him graduate. And so that's why I do what I do today. That's why I'm a doctor. That's why I practice the kind of lifestyle medicine I do today.
So what was Nathan Pritikin doing that was different from the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic or the other fine institutions of medicine we have in our country?
Sure. What Nathan Pritikin did was use lifestyle approaches not only to prevent disease, but treat and reverse chronic disease using a plant-based diet, a diet centered around whole plant foods. So fruits, vegetables, legumes, beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils, nuts and seeds, whole grains, mushrooms, herbs, and spices. A real food that grows out of the ground. That was the center of this diet. And he came to this conclusion after reversing his own heart disease by looking around the world and looking for populations where they didn't get heart disease, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, where there was a network of missionary hospitals set up by Western doctors earlier in the 20th century. And they were surprised that they didn't find our epidemic chronic disease. There was no type 2 diabetes and obesity and colon cancer. They didn't find epidemics of heart disease and stroke. And so we said, well, wait a second, maybe if we put people on the kind of diet that don't get heart disease, maybe we can slow down the disease, stop it even, but instead something miraculous happened. Arteries started opening up, reversing heart disease without drugs, without surgery, just a healthy enough plant-based diet and other common sense lifestyle approaches like smoking cessation and exercise. And so that's the number one killer. The number one killer of men and women is heart disease, something that we've known we could cure for decades. In fact, Dr. Dean Ornish published in The Lancet, the most prestigious medical journal in the world, July 1990, so we're now decades old, where he showed in black and white what's called quantitative angiography, where he could show images of the arteries opening up without drugs, without surgery, just these healthy lifestyle changes. So I figured, wait a second, if the cure to our number one killer could get just kind of buried, what else was in the medical literature that just didn't have a corporate budget driving its promotion that could help my patients? I made it my life's mission to find out. That's why I started nutritionfacts.org. That's why I wrote the book.
And what have you learned?
And what I've learned is that it's not just heart disease. I mean, if that's all a plant-based diet could do, reverse our number one killer, well, shouldn't that be the default diet until proven otherwise? And the fact that can also prevent, arrest, and reverse other leading killers like type 2 diabetes and hypertension would seem to make the case just overwhelming. Yet when I got to medical school, I was shocked to find out this whole area of lifestyle medicine using lifestyle approaches to reverse disease was largely ignored thanks to a number of things. The influence of the pharmaceutical industry, time constraints, reimbursement policies, But the role the drug industry has played in the education and training of doctors has really shifted our focus away from these approaches that essentially aren't profitable to, pills and procedures. I encourage people to ask their doctor when the last time they were taken out to lunch by Big Broccoli. Probably was a while ago.
But maybe Big Beef or Big Pharma, it was probably last week. In your book, you talk about how our physicians, people like yourself, are paid for procedures rather than for results. And I lived in Germany for a year back in the 80s, and doctors there, it's basically a single-payer healthcare system, but a local doctor was a good friend of mine, and he was basically paid a salary, and it was a salary of about, in U.S. dollars back in the 80s, the equivalent of maybe $120,000 a year, high end of middle class, and he was working with people on diet. He was working with people on exercise. He was literally taking people on walks through the forest to get them out there. Here's how you take a walk, and stuff like that.
Right.
How do we change this system in America where now for 30 years in the most reputable scientific journals literally in the world, there is absolute proof that going on basically a vegan diet, a plant-based diet, a meat-free diet, and a dairy-free diet will not only prevent all these diseases, but will reverse heart disease at the very least. How do we break through that? How do we, other than you and me talking about it in front of a television set? I mean, is that...
Well,
is that why you wrote the book?
That's why I wrote the book. I mean, there's a severe nutrition deficiency in medical education for doctors. Doctors are just not given these tools. They're just not taught how to use these approaches to help their patients. I mean, there's these kind of perverted incentive systems that incentivize kind of all the wrong things. And so if doctors are paid to do a certain thing, that's what they'll do. And unfortunately, doctors aren't paid to keep their patients healthy, right? I mean, they're paid the number one revenue source, for example, for physicians is actually high blood pressure checks, where someone has high blood pressure. 7 to 8 million Americans are affected. Most Americans over age 60 have high blood pressure. You have to go back to your doctor to keep getting your blood pressure checked. And so it's a boon to the drug industry because you have to take drugs every day for the rest of your life. It's a boon to the medical industry because you have to keep going back. But this is a disease that need not happen. This is a disease that can be reversed with a healthy enough diet, but there's no incentive to get this information out there. The reason you're not going to see an ad at the Super Bowl for sweet potatoes, right, is the same reason you're never going to see research published about broccoli. If it's even done in the first place, there's no corporate budget to drive its promotion. How's it going to get out there? There's no press release. You hear about the latest drugs. You may see an ad for the latest drugs, but you're never going to hear about these kind of approaches because, unfortunately, in this kind of profit-driven healthcare system, until we get some kind of single-payer system, unfortunately, we're never going to make these inroads for lifestyle medicine.
And with a single-payer system, then the government itself has an incentive to encourage people to have a healthy lifestyle and to promote those kind of things. And I didn't want to turn this into a discussion about single-payer. I mean, this is not what your book is about. Here you list the 15 top causes of mortality. Let me just read this list quickly, if I may. Coronary heart disease, number one. Lung disease, iatrogenic causes, that's doctors' mistakes, hospitals, infections. Brain disease, digestive cancers, like colon cancer and things, infections, diabetes, high blood pressure, liver disease, blood cancers, kidney disease, breast cancer, suicide, prostate cancer, and Parkinson's disease. Are you suggesting that all of these, including suicide, can be reduced, the frequency of them, the intensity of them, the probability of them can be reduced or reversed by a plant-based diet?
A plant-based diet can help prevent all of the top 15 causes of death, can help treat more than half of them, and even reverse some of them, including, in some cases, our top 3 killers. And the reason that, for example, suicide can be affected is because the number one cause of suicide is what's called major depressive disorder. And depression, we now know, is tied to a number of things, such as diet, such as sleep, such as exercise. There's a number of things that can affect our mood. And so for example, the dark green leafy vegetables, for example, have significantly lower odds of being diagnosed with major depression over a lifespan. And so there are specific foods in particular that are useful beyond just a general approach to reduce one's intake of meat, eggs, dairy, and junk, increase one's intake of whole plant foods. There are specific foods that have particular benefits either for mood, we're talking about lung health, or we're talking about high blood pressure. So I try to go through and pick out and just basically lay the science bare. We have a tremendous body of evidence out there. It's just a matter of translating out, getting that out to the public so people can take their own lives into their own hands, take their family's health and take some responsibility for it. I mean, the good news is that we have tremendous power over our health, destiny, and longevity. The vast majority of premature death and disability is preventable with a healthy enough plant-based diet and other healthy lifestyle behaviors.
Yeah. Well, my wife and I have become junkies of your website. You get these new videos up, and you put one up some time ago that my mother died of Alzheimer's. And you talked about how people who were taking 720 milligrams of turmeric a day didn't get Alzheimer's. And I'm sensitive to this issue, so I've been taking it 720 milligrams every day for a year or two. My brain seems to be working well. But, turmeric or curcumin, its active ingredient, but specifically turmeric, in fact, in that video, you said it's got to be the whole plant. There's synergistic things. Are there some of your, favorite foods, things that people really should... turmeric is the spice that makes curry. Right. That people should be trying to incorporate into their diet. We have about a minute before the break.
So there's a first part of the book, I talk about the role diet can play in preventing, arresting, or reversing our top 15 killers, but I didn't want it just to be a reference book. I wanted to be a practical guide on translating this mountain of evidence into day-to-day decisions. So the second section of the book, it centers around my daily dozen recommendation, this checklist of all the foods optimally I'd like to see in people's diets. And so that includes a quarter teaspoon of turmeric, a tablespoon of ground flax seeds, the berries and the greens, and I kind of go through the list. What are the healthiest beverages? What are the healthiest sweeteners? There we go. And the turmeric is a really fascinating story. I mean, the lowest validated rates of Alzheimer's in the world are in rural India, and there's a number of reasons that may be. They have the highest levels of vegetarianism, but they also eat a lot of curry. They also eat a lot of this turmeric. There are antioxidants, both colorful pigments and flavorful compounds within these foods, and turmeric is a spice that's both colorful and flavorful.
Great stuff. More of tonight's Conversations with Great Minds with Dr. Michael Greger right after the break. Speaking with Dr. Michael Greger, one of America's leading experts on all things nutrition, and the author of the new book, How Not to Die. Discover the foods scientifically proven to prevent and reverse disease. Dr. Greger, I know so many people who would benefit, who are on high blood pressure medications, who are on statins, they're suffering the side effects of them. I have a friend who ended up in a wheelchair from taking statins. How do you convey this information to people, and how do you get past that credibility issue of, why are you telling me this and my doctor isn't?
It was helpful for me to go back and kind of look at the situation in the 1950s with smoking. The average per capita cigarette consumption back in the 1950s, 4,000 cigarettes per person. Right? So that's the average American was smoking a half pack a day. Most physicians smoked, right? It was normal. The American Medical Association was telling people on balance, smoking was beneficial. That smoking in moderation proven to be safe. I mean, the same kind of stuff we hear over and over again. The media was telling people to smoke. The government was telling people. Mainstream medicine was telling people to smoke. But we had decades of science, even back then, starting back in the 30s, that showed that lung cancer was associated with smoking. Yet the Surgeon General report didn't come out to the mid-60s. It took 7,000 studies and decades before the Surgeon General report could finally come out. You think after the first 6,000 studies, it could have given people a little heads up or something? But that just shows what powerful industries can do in terms of suppressing this scientific information. So on one hand, you had all of society, the media, the government, the medicine itself telling people to smoke. On the other hand, all you had was the science. If you were even aware of what was being published in the medical literature, right? Now we can fast forward a few decades now, we're in the same kind of situation here, where the science is here, the science has been here, but we cannot wait until society catches up to the science because it's a matter of life and death.
Yeah, it literally is. And so If you have a friend and you're concerned about their health and clearly their lifestyle is not suiting them or serving them, what do you say?
Well, it's still up to each of us to make our own decisions as to what to eat and how to live, but we should make these choices consciously, educating ourselves about the predictable consequences of our actions, right? If you want to smoke, smoke. I mean, look, it's your body, your choice. As a physician, all I can do is tell you it's all about informed consent. This is what tends to happen to people in your situation if you do X, Y, and Z, right? And so, I mean, it's all about having the information, making your own decisions for yourself and your family. But unfortunately, people vastly overestimate the power of pills and procedures to prevent and treat disease. So, for example, if you survey people, the average person thinks statin drugs, these cholesterol-lowering drugs, are 20 times more effective than they actually are. In fact, if you tell them the truth in terms of how ineffective they actually are, most patients said they wouldn't take these drugs every day for the rest of their lives. So to practice conventional medicine is to practice deceptive medicine. We physicians have to we knew if we told the truth, people wouldn't take these drugs. So we have to cheerlead these drugs to get people to take them. We have to kind of overblow the benefits, because on a population scale, we can save a lot of lives. But it comes out of this patronizing attitude from the medical profession that people won't change. You know, I tell people, I show people the literature, I show people the science, I show these my fellow colleagues, and they're like, yeah, I'm not, of course, yeah, we know the science is, but my patients won't do it. But they don't offer that. They're making the decision for the patients, right? This kind of patronizing attitude. Sure, some of the patients won't do it. That's fine, but they should be given the choice. On one hand, here's the risks and benefits. On the other hand, here's the risks and benefits. All I'm saying is we just need to come out of this with the same information. And there's, again, this tremendous optimistic good news. We have tremendous power over our health destiny, but we have to be told about it.
Yeah. So how rigorous does one have to be? I mean, is it a matter of cutting your meat by 50%? Is it a matter and dairy products and things like that, or does it really have to go to zero?
It's not all or nothing. It's not black or white. These studies show that even so-called flexitarians or people so-called semi-vegetarians, those that are cutting down on meat or practice what's called a pro-vegetarian dietary pattern, which is just people that increase their consumption of plant-based foods, decrease their consumption of animal foods, actually have a survival advantage, actually live years longer than those that don't. And so this shows that you can accrue benefits, significant benefits, any step along the way towards healthy eating. It doesn't matter what you eat on your birthday or on holidays. It's the day-to-day stuff that adds up. And on the day-to-day basis, the more we can add these whole healthy plant foods into our diet and kind of both for their nutritional benefits and to crowd out less healthy options, the better.
Which is worse, meat or dairy?
Well, it depends what kind of meat, it depends what kind of dairy. So processed meat is now considered a class 1 carcinogen by the IARC, the official World Health Organization that classifies carcinogens, placing it in the same category as asbestos and cigarette smoke. Yet this is what we're feeding our children in our school system. So processed meats, we're talking about lunch meats and bologna and chicken nuggets, and turkey slices. Class 1 carcinogen. I was just at the CDC this week and talking about them. Why is this still being allowed in their schools? Why aren't they coming out with advisories telling people about this? Well, it's very politically unpalatable to have eat less messaging. Eat more messaging, they're down with. More fruits and vegetables, that's fine. But when you say eat less of something, then you're coming up against these powerful industries. Class 1 carcinogen, processed meat is probably the worst thing we can eat now that trans fats are slowly being moved out of the food system. But of course, dairy is the #1 source of saturated fat in the country. It's actually not beef. So I encourage people to reduce their intake of meat, eggs, dairy, and this processed junk food, and again, get more of these whole plant foods in their diet. In fact, that's one of the first things I do with patients is I just tell them to add more foods. I want them to eat the salad. I want them to eat this much fruit. And it just kind of pushes out, it kind of, crowds out some of the less healthy options as a way to slowly get their palate to change. And in a few weeks, of cutting salt out of someone's diet, their palate changes such that the soup that they liked initially is too salty. They actually prefer lower salt foods. And so people have this sense that it's deprivation. How could you live like I could never, go life without another pepperoni pizza? But you don't realize, no, your taste buds change. You actually enjoy that sweet potato. You actually enjoy healthy, natural foods taste good. If after a bowl of Fruit Loops you eat the ripest peach in the world, it would taste sour. But, you go a few weeks without this hyper salty, hyper fatty, hyper sugary palate that the processed food industry has all entrained us on, all of a sudden, healthy foods actually taste good. And so it's kind of the best of both worlds. Wait a second, tastes good and I get to live longer. That's what plant-based eating is all about.
Yeah. So where should someone begin? Just start diet. Oh, actually, I had another question I read a study a couple of months ago. It was a longitudinal study out of Scandinavia of men who ate 3 ounces of fatty fish a week or more versus men who didn't eat any at all. And the consequences with regard to dementia and lifespan were significant. Really statistically significant. But it was just a little tiny bit of fish. And I remember my dad, whose parents were both from Norway, and he was just like, every Saturday had to have kippered herring. And his brain was sharp as a tack all the way until the day he died. On the other hand, in one of your videos I watched, you said, this whole thing about fish oil, it's a bunch of nonsense. The studies are disproving this. So what's the story with fish and little tiny fatty fish like herring and sardines versus, bigger fish like tuna and cod and things like that, and fish oil as a supplement? What's the deal here?
So one of the reasons that we think that the meta-analyses, these compilations of all the best studies we have shown that fish oil and advice to eat more fatty fish have been useless in terms of primary prevention and secondary prevention, whether you're trying to prevent your first heart attack or if you have heart disease, trying to prevent another heart attack, useless in doing so. One of the reasons we think that's the case is because of the toxic pollutants that have built up in the aquatic food chain. And so if one is going to eat fish, it's the smaller fish, it's the minnows, the anchovies, the herring, versus the tuna, these large predator fish that live a long time, and these toxins like PCBs, dioxins, and mercury, they bioaccumulate up the food chain. And so we're like the bald eagles or the polar bears at the top of the food chain when we eat these large, long-lived predator fish. And so the negative effects of those toxic pollutants may be kind of counteracting the beneficial effects of these long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. So that's maybe one of the reasons. If we had a time machine, go back before the Industrial Revolution, then fish is a different story. But unfortunately now, if you are going to choose fish, the smaller, shortest-lived fish, the better. And unfortunately, our oceans have become so polluted, everything eventually kind of flows into the sea, that really the only kind of toxin-free sources, pollutant-free sources of these omega-3 fatty acids are the short chains found in flax seeds and walnuts and dark green leafy vegetables. And if one wants to get these long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, they can get algae-sourced omega-3 supplements, which is where the fish get it from in the first place, but you can kind of cut out the middle fish and go straight to the pollutant-free source.
That's interesting. I was in LA last weekend and having dinner with some friends, and the waiter came over and said, "We have East Coast cod." And I said, "East Coast cod?" And he said, "Yeah, no Fukushima." And it's like, people, this was a fancy restaurant in Los Angeles. People are starting to get it, that our food supply is poisoned. And so one of the big benefits of a plant-based diet is you're at the very bottom of the food chain.
Absolutely. But that shouldn't prevent us from taking political action to prevent the coal companies from polluting the earth with mercury, etc. We can't, yes, we need to, but I see a lot of kind of apolitical vegans, right? People that are like, look, I'm gonna eat clean for my family, right? I'm going to do the right things. But what about other communities? What about Flint, Michigan? What about, steps we can take as a society to clean up the food chain in general?
There you go. Dr. Michael Greger, it's an honor to have you with us, sir. Thank you so much. And the book, How Not to Die. Buy it, read it. It's brilliant. To see this and other Conversations with Great Minds, go to our website at conversationswithgreatminds.com.